Hey everyone, so we are doing a legendary gem tier list today, and I have all the legendary gems as well as I'll be doing it for every single class and an overall gem tier list. So you'll get to an idea of how I place all these gems. Some gems specifically like Freedom and Devotion here. This one is basically a Necro exclusive with one other class that I think is really good on. So we'll go over all the different classes because I believe some gems are way better than others for specific classes. That being said, let's jump into the overall gem tier list. So we're gonna go ahead and start off with the overall gem tier list. Now I have some of the stats of the overall max rank of these gems, what kind of stats you're getting from them. Now, if you want to go ahead and skip ahead and you already know what the gems do or whatever, go ahead and check out your class in the timestamps or click on the video where it says it. But if you want more information on what some of these gems can actually be, which some of them are pretty insane, go ahead and stick around for a little while. We're gonna go over my entire thoughts on each one of these gems. I will say 5-star gems are innately better if you can upgrade them due to their more combat rating and more resonance. If you have more duplicates of one gem, you may want to go for that one, even if it has a poorer effect. But in this tier list, we're only rating the gem effect because I don't know what's on your account. I don't know if you're paying. I don't know if you're free to play, all that good stuff. So we're going to start off with Battle Guard here. And Battle Guard's quite solid. It gives you a 24% reduced melee damage when you're within a certain yard amount of the enemy. It's 3 yards. On top of that, when you get your health below a certain amount, 15%, you're going to go ahead and get unhindered movement speed through enemies, which is very, very solid. Now, the only problem with this is there's 2 things really. One, if you're a ranged class, it's not good because you're not going to be in range of these enemies. And 2, if you're a melee class and you're using this, it's really only solid for specific PvE scenarios like the challenge rifts as well as PvP, because you don't really care about reducing your damage. Oftentimes PvE content is on the easier side of things. So I'm gonna go ahead and drop this in the C tier overall, simply for the fact that if you're a range class, I think it's a D tier. If you're a melee class, you can go B or C. So I'm gonna go ahead and put it in the middle right here at C tier. Next up is Berserker's Eye, and this is quite good. Really, what you're getting from this is a 16% damage increase permanently. It's a 1-star gem. You also increase your damage taken by 5%, and you're also going to increase your crit chance by 2% at max rank. Now, that is very, very good as a 1-star gem. 16% global damage boost can literally be used on every single person. And I think if you're going to pick one gem out of this entire 1-star, 2-star rank, get to max rank, which is rank 10, I would suggest that getting Berserker's Eye is probably one of the best, if not the best, 1-star legendary gem to go ahead and do that with. And so I would say that if you have a super pay to win account, then yeah, you're going to probably go with 6 5-star legendary gems. But if you go ahead and get this to rank 10 and Awaken, I think this is an S tier. I think it's going to be a great gem. And I would say that this is something that I would oftentimes recommend people go after, especially even if you're a medium spender. You can go ahead and max it out and get your Awakening. And this is the one I would recommend for that. Next up is going to be the Black Rose here, and the effect for this one is going to go ahead and give you a 10% chance to summon Immobilizing Effect, as well as immobilizing them for 3.5 seconds or 3.3 seconds. You cannot affect more enemy more than once every 20 seconds. And when you go ahead and get it to the max rank, you're going to go ahead and increase that chance to summon the vines. Keep in mind, this is a 3.3 second immobilize. So I think that this gem is a pretty much a PvP gem. You're not going to really immobilize bosses because you can't. And in PvE, you don't really care about that all too often. So I will say that this is probably, I'm going to say a C tier. And the only reason I'm putting it in a C tier is because I think that it has some exceptional use for PvP. I can't tell you how many times I've died to the Black Rose. But if you don't care about PvP at all, then I could see it being a D tier. So I'm going to put it in a C tier first because I think that the amount that you're immobilizing people for is absolutely absurdly long. So it's going to drop into C tier for me. Next up is Blessing of the Worthy, and this one is very, very good. It's also one of the only gems that you can actually just buy from the shop, which makes it a little bit more interesting. But this one is going to go ahead and give you a chance, 20% chance to go ahead and deal 28% of your life. Now, this is rank 10. So it's going to be very difficult to get to, but you're also going to get a reduced amount of damage, which is insanely good. for those melee classes. Now, keep in mind, this is an AoE around you, but it is a large AoE. So both ranged and melee classes can get use out of this. Although I will say, if you're a ranged class, you're going to get less use out of this than if you're a melee class by far. However, I think it's so good on melee classes that this is an S tier for me. I think every melee class, including some of the shorter range classes like Necro, get some massive use out of the Blessing of the Worthy. But I think that if you're a range class, you can go down to B or C tier, depending on what range class you are, what build you're running. But I think for the Necro, you could easily put this in the A tier. And for all the melee classes, it's going to be absolute S tier, probably your best gem, outside of a maybe Blood-Soaked Jade, which is coming up next. So next up, we do have the Blood-Soaked Jade. And get this, when you rank it up to 10, which is going to be absurdly long, again, it's a 24% damage boost and a 10% movement speed increase. Now, if you go ahead and get about half life, it's going to reduce that by half. But if you're also below 50% HP, you're going to get reduced damage taken. So this gem is, in my opinion, the all-time best gem in the game. There's a reason why it sells for max price. Getting yourself that extra 10% movement speed alone is absolutely absurd. But also 24% damage increase is more than Berserker's Eye. And it's not conditional in terms of you're not going to take additional damage as well, although you do need to be at higher life. So you'll get more value out of range classes with this gem than melee classes. But the melee classes are going to get the movement speed, which can get more value out of that than range classes typically. So absolutely absurd gem. Every class should have it if you are able to access it. Next up, we have Bloody Reach, and this gem is quite good. So this is going to give you additional damage based on how many yards apart you are from the enemy. Now, this can go up to 24% at 8 yards. So this is basically a ranged exclusive gem. I would suggest that you only get it on your ranged characters like Wizard or Demon Hunter. If you're not playing those classes, it's probably not going to be good at all, or very, very minor in terms of its bonus that you're getting. Now, that being said, I do think that it's quite solid for those classes. So I'm going to put it in a B tier. I think that if you're picking a 2-star legendary gem, then this is one's going to be very, very solid for you to pick up. If you're those ranged classes, you could get some use out of it. If you're a Necro, or even if you're melee class like a Crusader who plays from range, drops your abilities, and then you stick from range, especially in like Path of Blood or Challenge Rifts or things like that. But that being said, it's really just going to be a Demon Hunter or Wizard gem. And if it wasn't, I would actually put it probably in an A tier or an S tier, because 24% damage, constant damage increase at rank 10 is absolutely absurd for those ranged classes. Next up, we have Bottled Hope, and this one's a new gem on the global launch. This one is absolutely amazing, but the only thing is you need to have a class that sends out buff effects. So when you go ahead and put out a buff, you're going to give that target, it can be an AoE or a single target, 24% damage and movement speed for 6 seconds, and decrease their skill cooldowns by 6%. Now that's at rank 10, so it's going to be much less. Mine at rank 4 is going to go ahead and give you a 13% damage increase and movement speed. This is a 20-second cooldown per target, but keep in mind that you can use this on your Demon Hunter or your Barbarian when you're using Undying Rage or Vengeance. This makes it absurdly good for every single class. The only problem with it is that if you stack a few in your group, you're going to get very, very large diminishing returns due to the fact that this effect does not stack on top of each other, but it does go ahead and you can stagger it and get much, much more value out of it. Now, it does work with Crusader's Banner. It works with Sprint AoE buff. It works with Demoralize. It works with Bone Armor for Necro. It literally has so many different uses in the game. This is an S tier for me. I think that this gem is highly underrated by a lot of people. And I think that you absolutely need one of these in your party to get some major, major bonuses out of it. I think Bottled Hope is very, very good. Next up, we have Carson's Invigoration. This one's actually quite solid for 2 classes in particular. And I think that really what you're going to get out of this is just speed of primary attack, as well as primary attack damage increase by 2%. So what you're getting out of this is just more primary attack. So if you have a class that can primary attack all the time, this is very, very good. So 2 things here. I think that the Demon Hunter is automatically 100% you need to run this most of the time. If you are at the point where you get a bunch of resonance from your 5-star gem, you can start to replace that. But this is a gem that you're really, really going to want to run for the Demon Hunter because you're constantly primary attacking. On top of that, I think the Monk actually gets a lot of use out of it because you could teleport with your basic. When your primary attack speed is higher, you can teleport faster, which makes it very, very good for Elder Rift farming, for open world farming, and for dungeon farming all over the place. So I actually really like this gem, and every class can get use out of it. And there's some classes that this is an absolute game-breaking one for them. So I'm gonna put it in an A tier. I think the Crusader could get use out of it. I think that the Barbarian can get a lot of use out of it, especially stacking with their Frenzy primary attack, as well as I think Necro and all the classes can get use out of this. But I think that for some of the classes, it's B tier, and for some of the classes, it's S tier. So I'm gonna put it in A tier here for the overall tier list. Next up, we have one that I kind of like a little bit less, and that is Chained to Death. This one's going to go ahead and increase your damage done when you hit multiple targets by 4.5%, and it's going to increase to 4 targets, and you can increase that to 6% damage. So basically, if you're using an AoE, you're going to increase your damage by a decent amount. Now, this is quite solid. The only problem is you don't necessarily hit a bunch of targets when you're hitting the boss. You're only going to hit one target. And so this really doesn't have any effect in terms of killing bosses, and that's one of the main parts of the game. So I'm gonna put this at a C tier because I think that you can get some value out of it overall on all classes, especially with, you know, Demon Hunter's basics penetrating, and you have Consecration or Spinning Shield for Crusader, or you have Whirlwind for Barbarian. You have a lot of characters that can go ahead and do some AoE moves, but the problem is that most of the time you want your damage increase on the boss. And so far, these ones in S and A and B tier here, they're all doing damage all the time. There's no like circumstance where you're not in terms of bosses. So you really, really want that if you want it to be in these higher tiers. Next up, we have Chip of the Stone Flesh. Now, this one is hard to rate because it's very difficult to get some major use out of it. Now, this is actually insane at rank 10 because when you go ahead and control or use a loss of control effect, so a CC move like a stun, or a fear or something like that, where you go ahead and you prevent them from moving or something like that, you're going to go ahead and apply a mark. Now, when you actually go ahead and apply this mark, you can go ahead and increase the mark's damage if you do damage during that time, and it will explode for 45% of the damage taken during the duration. Now, this can only happen 20 seconds per target, as well as you're also going to go ahead and increase the damage you deal to that target when they have a cursed effect on them. This is quite good, but the only problem is it's hard to get use out of when you're considering that you have to constantly be hitting him during the target. You also cannot CC bosses, so that brings it down a little bit because you can't apply loss of control to bosses. So I would say I'm going to put this in the B tier. I think this is quite solid, especially in PvP and when you're taking out those open world monsters. But other than that, you're not going to help kill bosses, and that's one of the big part of the game. So I'm going to put it in B tier for my opinion. Also, not every class can do loss of control consistently to get use out of the mark effect. Next up, we have Cutthroat's Grin. This one's actually very, very good if you're able to consistently be behind your target, because you get 24% increased crit chance when you're behind your target, also dealing additional damage by 1% when you're behind your target. So really, in my opinion, this is going to go ahead and be very solid for your ranged classes, but very much weaker for your melee classes. If you happen to have a Demon Hunter that's targeting from the behind the enemy, which happens quite significantly in boss fights, you get 24% crit chance. Now, if you're running a Bannered Crusader with that actually translates to about 24% crit damage, which is also very good. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this in the B tier. Similar to the Bloody Reach, I think that really the ranged classes are going to get a lot of use out of it. Your melee classes can get use out of it. The only problem is you're going to have to constantly be moving, and you're not going to get a lot of use out of it in PvE overall. But I think the boss fights are good enough for this gem to be on B tier for me personally. Now, next up is going to be the Defiant Soul here, and this one's a little interesting here because I think this one's very specific to a few classes. Every class has block chance, and when you block with this gem, you're going to deal 192% base damage plus a little bit of extra at rank 10, and this cannot occur over more than once every 20 seconds. Also, you're also going to decrease the damage you take over a period of time after this happens. So this is specifically, in my opinion, a Crusader gem early on. I think that not a lot of classes have this effect all the time, and because of this, I'm actually going to put it in D tier. The effect is minor, but on top of that, you're not going to be able to proc it often unless you're a Crusader, due to the fact that the Crusader gives you extra block chance on your basic. So I will say that it could be very good for the Crusader. I would say B tier for maybe Crusader, but every other class doesn't really proc it enough, and so I'm going to put it in the D tier for that case. Next up, we have Echoing Shade, and this one's a little interesting. It's a 5-star legendary gem as well. Some of the other ones here. And this one's going to give you a chance to summon a clone that lasts for 20 seconds and gain some of the attributes. When you go ahead and max it up, you can get 2 clones, which is insane. You could also proc this just by auto attacking randomly. This gem uses the basic attack of your character. And so because of that, I think this is a really good gem for specifically the Demon Hunter, which we'll go over later on. But I think that overall, you're not going to get a lot of use out of this in terms of like massive damage, but that doesn't mean it's a bad gem. I'm actually going to drop this one in a B tier here because I think that every class can get use out of a clone that tanks some damage and does a primary attack for you. It's going to be extra damage. It's going to be solid. The only problem is it's a little inconsistent, but you can proc it before the battle and charge up your Shadow Clones that way. Demon Hunters specifically get a lot of use out of this one. Next up is going to be Everlasting Torment. Now, this is an interesting one because a lot of people think Everlasting Torment's a better 1-star gem than Berserker's Eye. However, I disagree with that fact simply because Berserker's Eye scales with you throughout the whole game, scales with your resonance, scales with all that good stuff because it's a percentage of your damage, overall damage. Now, Everlasting Torment also scales with you the whole game, but not as well. It's based on your base damage, so it will do some solid damage, and it will deal 30% of your base damage plus a little bit of extra damage every second for 6 seconds, which is a lot of damage to your enemies. The only problem is it really doesn't do too much in open world farming. It's really specific towards boss killing or in PvP when you can install bandages. So I think this is also a very solid gem, but for me, it's a step down from Berserker's Eye. And that being said, it also increases your attack speed when you apply this effect, this burn effect to your enemies. So for me, it's an A tier gem. Every class can get solid use out of this because all you have to do is hit enemies. And you can also apply it to multiple enemies, which is really, really good. But the only problem is, I think that overall the Berserker Eye takes a little bit of extra value over Everlasting Torment for me. And so I'm going to put that in S tier and Everlasting Torment in A tier here. Next up, we have a very, very specific gem, and that is going to be Follower's Burden here. This one is a little bit interesting because we have something that's kind of class specific here. And what do I mean by that? Well, Follower's Burden here is going to go ahead and increase all damage you deal by 3% for each summon you control, up to an increase of 18%. Now, how many summons are people going to have? Well, it's only going to be a few, unless you're a Necromancer. Echoing Shade could count, if you're running anything like that or extra clones or anything like that, but you're really only getting value out of this if you're a Necro, in my opinion. So because of that, for me, it's a C tier. And the reason why it's a C tier is because it's very, very good on Necro, but only on Necro. So you could even argue that's a D tier overall. But I would say that it's because of how good it is on Necro, I'm going to put it in C tier. So you're just going to get increased damage from your summons, and not a lot of people run summons. Next up is going to go ahead and be another one that's kind of specific towards Necro here. And that is going to be Freedom of Devotion, and Devotion here. And that is going to increase the duration of your summons by 24% and increasing the damage of your summons by 0.75%. Now, because the Necro summons a bunch of summons, the Follower's Burden is quite solid for it because you can go ahead and max up your damage to the 18% that the maximum is, and it's not really good for any other class. Now, Freedom and Devotion, I think, has 2 places where it's good opposed to the Follower's Burden. The Monk as well as the Necro. So obviously for the Necro, it's going to increase your summon duration, but also for the Monk, you have Mystic Allies, and this will increase the duration by 24%, while also increasing their damage. Now, I don't think Follower's Burden is quite good enough because you're not going to reach that cap of the 18% damage. Keep in mind, these are at rank 10, as I've said previously, but I think the Follower's Burden, you can get some really, really good value out of Mystic Allies and out of the Necro summons. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in B tier here for us. That being said, I think that it might be an A tier for Monk, maybe a B tier for Monk, and an A to an S tier for Necro. So you could say that it's a C tier. I could accept that. So maybe it's a low B, C tier type gem. Next up, we have Howler's Call. And this one's an interesting one because I think that it's very, very solid for a PvP build, and it's only minorly useful for a PvE build. What this does is go ahead and when you swap with a primary attack, you're going to basically have a 10% chance to summon a wolf. It's going to charge forward and deal a ton of damage, 360% of your base damage plus a little bit extra in the path. as well as having a chance to stun for 3 seconds, a 12% chance. So this is an absolutely absurd gem for PvP because you could literally shoot out your wolf without hitting anyone. So your ranged attackers can go ahead and pre-fire and shoot out the wolf, perhaps stun someone, literally knock them off their horse, or just deal a bunch of damage. So I think this is going to go ahead and bring it to a B tier for me. Now, the reason why I put it in B tier is because when you're talking about PvE content, oftentimes this gem, because it has a 20-second cooldown, is oftentimes used on the trash waves, which you were already going to one-shot anyways, and then it does no damage to the boss, and you're not going to get a ton of value out of it in PvE. Maybe in challenge rifts and things like that, in those types of scenarios. But for PvP, you're going to get a lot of value out of it. For me, it's a B tier overall. Next up, we have the Hunger, and this one seems better than I think it is, but I've literally never found a use out of it. The problem is, what this does is it heals for 140% of base damage every time we defeat an enemy. It also increases our attack speed every single time we defeat an enemy for 3 seconds at the same rate as a rank 10 of Carson's. So I actually think that this gem is a little slept on, because when you kill an enemy in PvE, which is going to happen in open world farming, it's going to happen in dungeons, it's going to happen in Elder Rifts, you could translate that into a lot of extra attack speed. The only problem is you're not going to be able to do it on boss fights generally, unless they spawn ads, and a lot of bosses do. So you may be able to proc this as well, and it'll be just as good as Carson's, while also giving you that incidental heal. But the heal doesn't really give you all that much, because you don't necessarily need heals oftentimes in this game, except for maybe challenge rifts. So for me, it's also a B tier. I think that you can get value out of this, but the only problem is that I don't think it's as good as it may seem, even though I think that it is quite solid. I've literally not seen anyone use this. So if you've used it and you've seen some really good effect, let me know in the comments down below. By the way, any gem here, if you disagree, let me know in the comments down below, because it's definitely an opinion based with some definitely a lot of time spent in the game. Next up, we have Lightning Core, and this one, in my personal opinion, is my favorite, because my favorite 2-star gem, that is, and that is because it just does a ton of damage on an AoE. Now, when you go ahead and move around, it has a 20-second cooldown, but you're going to go ahead and release a chain lightning that's going to do 280% damage plus a little bit of extra. It's very similar to that Howler's Call, except it's guaranteed to hit, which is the problem with Howler's Call. And it also will increase damage by 12% for a little bit after you've gone ahead and proc this out. So for me, this is an A tier 2-star gem. I think this is probably the best 2-star legendary gem overall. But for some classes, maybe Bloody Reach is a little bit better. So I definitely think that this is a solid one to go after. Next up is Mocking Laughter. Now, this one is very, very awkward, because this makes all your primary attacks make non-elite monsters target you for 6 seconds. It also decreases damage you take by 2% from monsters affected by this taunt. To me, this is an absolute D tier. I don't see any place where you would want to use this besides challenge rifts in groups, where you have one really strong person and you taunt it so that they can't go after the other people. But oftentimes the elite monsters are the ones you're worried about. So I just don't see any place that you'd want to get high value out of this, or you could get high value out of this. To me, this is an absolute D tier gem. Next up, we have Nightmare Wreath, and this is a 10% chance when you defeat an enemy to cause other nearby enemies to flee for 2.4 seconds, and it cannot occur more than once every 20 seconds. This also increases the damage we deal to enemies afflicted by fear by 2%. Now, this one's a little bit interesting. I think this is actually quite a solid challenge rift gem specifically. Other than that, I don't really feel like you're going to get a lot of use out of it. You could use it in PvP, but the chance is so low and you have to kill someone. The reason why I like it in challenge rifts is because you're going to kill a lot of groups of enemies, and it could cause people to fear for a little bit. Other than that, I don't see any use for it, really. So to me, it's also a D tier gem. I think the only place you could use it is a challenge rift place, and even then, it's not amazing. So maybe it's a C tier because of that, but to me, it's a D tier. So I'm going to keep it in D tier. Next up is Pain of Subjugation. This is going to increase your damage by 16% to enemies that are suffering from that loss of control. It's also going to decrease the damage that we take while we are under a loss of control effect. To me, this is a C tier gem. There's only a few classes that have consistent loss of control effects. So like the Barbarian, when they're going ahead and grabbing people together, or when you've just stunned someone and then burst them out. To me, there's some minor uses to this gem, but overall, not going to get consistent value out of it. Also cannot be applied to bosses. So to me, it's a C tier gem. Next up is Phoenix Ashes. Now, this one, I feel like a lot of people think I've underrated based on my previous video on the guide to pay to win and free to play legendary gems. But to me, this is a PvP gem and a challenge rift gem. Other than that, you're not going to get a ton of value out of it because you shouldn't be dying in your PvE content normally. That's probably a mechanics mistake or something like that. That being said, I think it's so absurdly good in PvP and in challenge rifts that I'm going to give it an A tier. This basically allows you to go ahead and prevent death, giving you a shield for 6 seconds that absorbs damage equal to 1,000% of your base damage. And when you go ahead and the shield expires, you're going to heal for 20% of the shield value. Now in PvP, the shield's quite small, but despite that, it's very, very good for getting you out of those trick scenarios and just keeping you alive for people who may think you're dead, and then you can run away with that little bit of shield left. I think it's very, very good, especially for those PvP scenarios, at an A tier for me. Next up is power and command. Now, I personally don't like this as much as some other gems. What it does is give you a 24% primary attack damage increase or 24% skill damage increase for 9 seconds based on what mode it is. So it starts, let's say, power. It's going to go 9 seconds of power, which is primary attack damage increase, and then swaps to 9 seconds of command, which is skill damage increase, as well as giving us a 30% chance to dispel a negative effect when it swaps between power and command. Now, yes, 24% damage increase sounds amazing, but the problem is, let's say you're running Demon Hunter, who really uses primary attacks a ton. Well, you're going to be interweaving your skills, so you're not going to get value out of command state, but you're going to get value out of power. So it's not a 24% damage increase. It's probably like around a 12 to 15% damage increase consistently at max rank. Because of the fact that you're not saving your skills every 9 seconds, you're going to lose more damage if you have a cooldown that's coming up and you've used it and you're waiting for the next time it swaps. So to me, this is a B tier gem. It's quite solid in terms of its damage potential, but to me overall, there's no real class that gets extra value over reverse value, except for maybe the Demon Hunter, who may get a little bit of extra value. Other than that, you're going to have to manage the states, and it's a little bit complicated, and overall, I just think it's not as good as it may seem. Next up, we have Respite Stone, and Respite Stone here is a little bit interesting. You're going to take decreased damage based on how much life you're missing, down to a 16% damage decrease or up to a 16% damage increase, while also gaining a little bit of armor, 1.5% under 50% life. This gem to me is a C tier gem. The reason why it's not D tier is because you will always gain consistent value out of this, assuming you're taking damage. The problem is the value is low and you don't really care about decreasing damage generally in PvE content. So to me, this is a C tier gem and there's not really much to say about it. Next up, we have Seeping Bile, and this is probably one of the more sought after gems as well. This one at rank 10 is going to go ahead and give you 4% chance to poison enemies, dealing 65% base damage plus a little bit of extra, 263 every second over 6 seconds, and it spreads to nearby enemies when the poisoned enemy dies, and it cannot affect the same target more than once every 20 seconds. It also decreases their movement speed by 6% when affected by this poison. Now, this is an absolutely amazing challenge rift gem, absolutely amazing PvE gem, amazing PvP gem because it also stalls bandages. Overall, it just does a lot of damage, spreads around, and just does so much work. To me, this is an S tier gem. You're going to get a lot of value out of it. I've noticed that Seeping Bile does a lot of my damage in challenge rifts. It does a lot of damage overall just because of it constantly proccing, even though it's low chance. It's going to get value whether you're PvE or PvP in boss fights, not in boss fights. Overall, you're just going to get a lot of value out of this Seeping Bile. Next up, we have Sleed's Weakening. This is going to give you increased damage after you've killed an elite monster by 6%. I believe it goes up a little bit farther for 60 seconds after killing an elite monster. You're also going to increase your damage that you deal to elite monsters by 1%. Now, the only problem with this gem is you're not going to find elite monsters oftentimes in dungeons, all that often at least. You're also not going to find them all that often in open world unless you're group farming, which you will, and you will be able to get some value there. The only place that, to me, that this gets consistent value is group open world farming or Elder Rifts. Other than that, you're not getting a ton of value out of this. So to me, this is a B tier gem because it's very good in those situations where those elite monsters spawn. But other than that, you're not going to get much value out of it. So really, it's an Elder Rift gem, but it's really good at being an Elder Rift gem. So I think it's a B tier gem. Next up, we have Trick Shot Gem. Now, Trick Shot Gem is going to be a solid gem for your characters that are using channeled skills. Now, what does this do? It's going to consume energy slower for your channeled skills by 24%, also decreasing damage that you take during that channel duration. So this is going to give you a massive amount of value for your barbarians or for your wizards, but really only for those classes. So to me, this is a B tier gem, but only because of those classes. For every other class, this gets an immediate D tier. Because I don't really think that there's many other channels in the game that you're going to be constantly using. If you disagree and you have a build out there that's really good with the trick shot gem for like Crusader, for example, and you're spinning sweep strike, let me know. But I think that in general, this is going to be a barb or wizard gem that may be A tier. Honestly, I'm reconsidering it. I'm going to say C tier because I think that for barb and wizard, you could say A or B, but for every other class, I'm going to say D. So I'm going to put it in C tier here for you all. Next up, we have Unity Crystal, and this one is very awkward. The problem with this one is that you need you and your party members to use it. So what it does is all party members take 1.5% reduced damage per additional party member within 6 yards. Now, if you stack this upon yourself, it's actually quite good. So let's say you have multiple people running this, you're going to get stacking damage reduction, and it starts to get really, really strong. But the only problem is you also need your party members to be within 6 yards of each other, which is also hard to do. And it's only, assuming you have 4 party members in the duration or in the circle, only 6% damage reduction, which is good, but not great. So to me, this is a C tier gem because you can get incidental value out of it, but you really want people to use a lot of them so you can get some value out of it. Overall, just not that great. Next up, we have the Zod Stone, and this one is interesting, but very, very poor. The reason for this is it increases your duration of your ultimate skills by 48% and increases the damage dealt by ultimate skills. One, you're not going to get consistent value out of this because you're not going to have your ultimate nearly enough. And two, you're also not getting a ton of value because your ultimate doesn't do or isn't that impactful oftentimes. So for me, this is a D tier gem. And I'm going to keep it in D tier because I don't think the ultimate skills are good enough to warrant this being great. Next up, we have Zwenson's Haunting, and another one that's going to be a new gem. And this one's going to summon a dark beast to attack nearby enemies, dealing 120% base damage, plus a little bit of extra damage, occurring once every 6 seconds, while also giving it an additional chance to summon dark beasts when we just kill an enemy. So this to me is kind of awkward because the only value you get from this is when people die. You don't get just instant value, so you don't get any value when you're killing bosses usually, assuming you're bursting down the bosses. You don't get any value in PvP usually, and so usually it's just an open world farming or challenge rift crystal, and those areas it can be good, but to me this is a C tier gem. It's the only 5-star legendary gem to me that's worse than the others, and you can kind of see this in game. No one wants to pick these up. I think that it's interesting and can be solid for sure. To me, it could be a B tier. I could see the argument for that. But I don't think that you're going to get enough value out of this to warrant expending a lot of rank ups on this gem, unless you happen to get lucky, like Smiley out of there. If you're watching this video, that gets a 5 out of 5 Zwenson's Haunting. You may want to use that because of the extra resonance. Overall, that's going to be my legendary gem tier list. Now we're going to go ahead and quickly go through what I think about every specific class. So first up, we have the Crusader, and this one is going to be pretty simple. We're gonna have the very same S tier gems. There's a reason why they were S tier overall. And then I believe Chip of the Stone Flesh jumps up a little bit here due to the fact that you have a lot of CC effects on the Crusader, and you can get a lot of chances to proc this if you wish to do so. Battle Guard is very solid for the Crusader as well. I think Carson's a little bit worse because you're not primary attacking as much, although you do get a lot of primary attacks off on your horse. And then overall, I think the Hunger is a little bit better due to the fact that you're going to be melee and in the fight taking more damage. Another one that's important, I'm not going to mention all of these because I think we've already gone over all of them, but Power and Command, you're not going to be primary attacking as often and getting more use out of this as the Demon Hunter. And Echoing Shade, the clones aren't going to do much, and Bloody Reach obviously is at D tier now from B tier due to the fact that you're going to be melee, so you're not going to get much use. Trick Shot and the summon ones you can't summon really, and Trick Shot you can't use too many channeling skills that are solid. So overall, that's going to be the Crusader, and I think we already got the explanation over the overall gem, so I'm going to continue on with the next classes. Next up is the Barbarian, and a few changes. Phoenix Ashes is an S tier for me for the Barbarian, simply because it combos with the Undying Rage, and it gives you multiple times to go ahead and prevent death basically. And so when this happens, it becomes absurd where you have so much duration of not dying or preventing death that you end up just being able to kill your opponent, especially in PvP or even in PvE. Oftentimes I've seen some of my barbarian friends who they pop Undying Rage and Challengers or whatever, and they just have so much not dying capability that I think Phoenix Sash is a little bit better for the barbarians, especially since you're melee as well. Trickshot Gem is up here as well, simply because you're going to be running with Whirlwind so often. Champ of the Stone Flesh is also really easily procs with the Gathering, which is your Whirlwind. You're not going to be basicing enough to benefit from the speed of the primary attacks. And then other than that, I put Freedom of Devotion up here in C tier, simply because you're going to be running the Hammer of the Ancients, I believe the skill is called, and it's going to be summoning someone oftentimes. So you may be able to get a few uses out of that one, but I think that one can be easily placed in D tier, depending on who you are. So there's going to be the Barbarian. Let's move on to the next class. Next up is the Necro. Now this one's a little interesting because I believe there's a bug with Everlasting Torment from one of my fellow players in Aftershock that uses the Necro. I think that Everlasting Torment doesn't proc off the summons, but I believe it should. The Sleeping Bow and the Everlasting Torment should be procking off of summons. It's important to note that with the Bottled Hope here with the Necro, it's going to apply to your summons as well. So if you cast Bone Armor, it also applies to your summons, which is really nice. So that's definitely very solid. I think Blessing is still super good, and you're short enough range where I think you could still get a lot of value out of the Blessing. So I'm going to put it in A tier here. And then, of course, we have a bunch of changes down here with the Freedom of Devotion and Follower's Burden. They're going to be at A tier because of how important summons are in a lot of the Necro's build. And I think they definitely benefit from this quite a bit. Chip is still at B because you get a lot of CC effects. Lightning Core drops down in my opinion because I think the summon value is a little bit more important than the Lightning Core. And Bloody Reach and things like that, you're not going to be insanely far away, even though you are ranged compared to the Demon Hunter or the Wizard. So I don't think it's quite as good for this class as it is for the Demon Hunter or Wizard. But still quite solid. And then overall, I think a lot of the other ones are pretty self-explanatory, but we're going to jump into the next class here, the Monk. So the Monk here, we're going to have a very similar S tier gem list here. Again, these are just so great legendary gems. Bottled Hope has taken a step down here, and for the reason because we don't have a ton of group buffs for the Monk, but you do have a couple of really good ones like Inner Sanctuary and Shield of Zen that you'll be applying to allies oftentimes, and you can get some value out of it. And I think the effect from Bottled Hope is so good that if you have a few skills that can proc it, it's definitely worth bringing on. I also think that Carson's is a little bit better on the Monk as well, due to the fact that you could teleport quickly when you have faster primary attack speed. Another one that's kind of cool is the Echoing Shade. I think Echoing Shade is actually kind of solid because if you're running Mystic allies, you can extend the Echoing Shade clone with Freedom of Devotion. It's kind of a funny build. This is purely from Deadwood Jedi. I'm sure many of you know him out there if you played Raid, but this specific combo is actually really fun to watch. So I decided to put this one up in B tier because I could see you amplifying your summons with that combination. But overall, I think that you could get a little bit extra value because your primary attack is quite solid on the Monk from the Echoing Shade. Next up, another one that I wanted to mention really quickly here is going to be the Bloody Reach and Cutthroat's Grin that's dropped down. You're not going to be behind enemies oftentimes because you're melee, and you're not going to get the extra bonuses from Bloody Reach. And everything else kind of stays the same relatively. So we're going to jump into the next class here. And this one is a lot different than the other ones we've seen. I believe Everlasting Torment jumps up to an S tier because we want the damage dealing gems on our Wizard. Also, Blessing of the Worthy, this is the lowest it's going to be. I think B tier is the lowest a Blessing should ever be. The effect is very powerful, even on your ranged, less tanky classes, due to how wide the radius is, and you always take damage no matter what class you are. So I think it's still a good, solid B tier. Bloody Reach, I think, is an A tier here on the ranged classes. Maybe even S tier, but you don't really want to upgrade a 2-star gem all the way. Carson's and Howlers can be procced as a ranged class in advance, so you could pre-fire it. Really like that option with it, especially for PvP. And then we have Trickshot Gem also bringing up to an A tier. You're going to use a lot of channeling effects, so if you happen to have this one, it's going to be really solid for you to bring in. And other than that, I think the only one that is a little bit different is maybe Battle Guard, Bottled Hope, which are in a D tier now. You're really not bringing a lot of buffs to the party with the Wizard, so I don't think you're going to get a lot of value out of Bottled Hope, but you could buff yourself, I believe. I'm not exactly sure what you could do with the Bottled Hope here too much, but Battle Guard here, you're not going to get any value out because you're not going to be in range of people oftentimes, so I think it's a D tier as well. Last up, we're going to go for the Demon Hunter. Lopsided of them all in terms of legendary gems, and you may be surprised to see a few here in the S tier. First off, Bottled Hope is up. And this is because it works with Vengeance. I believe that because it works with Vengeance, it's a must-have gem for the Demon Hunter. I mean, if you're just talking about like running solo, or even if you're in a group and you're not close enough to your party members to proc Bottled Hope, or if they don't have Bottled Hope, remember this is literally an 8% damage increase and an 8% movement increase basically for the entire duration of your Vengeance, which is absolutely absurd because your Vengeance is when you're doing the most damage oftentimes, and you're going to be able to amplify that time period with the extra damage from Bottled Hope, as well as giving you extra kiting potential. I think Bottled Hope is easily an S tier. For me, I could see the argument for an A tier, but I still think it's good enough to be an S tier. Another one that's an S tier is the Carsons. And again, I think it's just because you're going to be basic so much that you're going to get full value from this gem. And if you're able to get full value from the extra attack speed bonus, as well as the extra primary attack bonus damage, you're going to get a lot of value from this. Everlasting Torment is another one that you're going to be doing a lot of damage with. So you're going to want to bring in Everlasting Torment when you crit, getting that agony out there, increasing your primary attack speed. And then not going too far in depth into all these, but Bloody Reaches again is an A tier. Echoing Shade is an A tier as well, due to the fact that you're going to be primary attacking with that clone. Power and Command is at an A tier again. This is where like a lot of things have changed up, because you're going to be able to get full value from the primary attack side while still getting some value out of the skill side. Blessing of the Worthies is at a B tier here, simply because you're not going to get a ton of value because you're not melee. And then other than that, a bunch of the really close range ones or the summon ones are at a D tier here. And so I think that gives you an overall look on the Demon Hunter. So there you have it. There's all 6 classes, as well as a bunch of information on the legendary gems, my thoughts on all of them. Hopefully this was in-depth enough for some of you. Again, if you made it to the end of the video, thank you a lot, and I would appreciate you subbing to the channel. Other than that, let me know what you think about the list in the comments down below, if you would change anything, or if you think I'm sleeping or overrating some of these gems. And I will see you in the next video.